There we go. Can everybody see this now?
Yeah.
Great. So we are going to talk about native plants. It's a wonderful time of year to talk about them. A lot of people think of fall as sort of a downtime. It's actually a very active time in the garden. This is a fabulous time to be planting, but also planting in your gardens. Lots of things still available in the nurseries. So I would encourage you to take a look out there and see what you can include in your garden. And then Christy's going to tell you a little bit more about why we're here.
Yeah, so Laura, I did take the opportunity to talk about this a little bit, but I'll just point out these are stormwater systems. So if you're not familiar, take a look around your neighborhood. We've got the storm drains and our ditches. And right now, I just really encourage everyone, make sure that only rain is going down those. That includes leaf and litter debris, which we see a ton of in the fall. Even that can clog up these systems, and they can also pour tons of nutrients into the streams, which can be harmful. So this is what they look like, and only rain through these systems, please. You can skip this one too. Thanks, Laura.
Right, so here's what we're going to talk about tonight. We're going to go through the points on the screen, talk a little bit about the climate in the Northwest, how that relates to the kinds of plants we grow, how native plants and stormwater interact with each other, how to design a native plant garden, including how to choose your plants, planting techniques and plant care, and then more about the Soak It Up rebate program as a reminder. And then at the very end, we've included some resources. Since this recording will be available to you and I can make PDF version available to Christy, you guys don't have to worry about taking too many notes on those resource links. They will be there for you to check out. So we live in this fabulous place that has what we call a maritime climate, because our temperatures are modified by the ocean and Puget Sound and the Strait of Juan de Fuca and all these big bodies of water around us. We are in the north, so we can get cold weather, but we don't get continental climate like the Midwest does. So we don't get those fierce cold winds in the winter and really chilly snows that come through in other parts of the country. We're very lucky that way. We do have mountain ranges, and we have very many different microclimates as well. So as you look around the map in the Northwest, you have people that live up in the Issaquah Highlands that are going to have very different temperature from somebody that lives down in Edmonds that's right on the water. So lots of different zones in the Northwest. And all of these features help to keep us cooler in the summer and warmer in the winter. And that's to our benefit, and it does speak to what kind of plants will grow here. One of the ways that we can choose plants is looking at the climate map that the USDA has created that is related to plant hardiness. So they're looking at the average and minimum temperatures across the country and what plants can survive those temperatures. So you can use that to determine. Many plant labels have this information on them that you can read. The thing that's interesting about this is the data they've been collecting covers a 30-year period from 1976 to 2005. But it took them from 2005 to 2012 to actually create a new map because there was dissension about what they were seeing. What this resulted in is a new zone distribution because there was a 5-degree Fahrenheit increase in average temperature across the board. So we ended up with some tropical, subtropical climate zones that were different than what we used to have. And now is 15 years past that. So warmer temperatures because of climate change, probably we're already seeing more than 5 degrees difference than what they saw in 2012. And then the Sunset Western Garden book has a completely different set of maps that go to microclimates along the West Coast. And so they're speaking to those divisions that are within our area that I mentioned about Edmonds versus the Issaquah Highlands. So those numbers are different. They're not relevant to this map, but they use this map sort of as a baseline, and then they break it out from there. That's very helpful to those of us who garden, in these areas and might have a different climate from each other. So take a look at the mapping that can help you decide how to pick plants. And then really native plants are adapted to this kind of weather cycle. We get most of our heavy rains during the winter, starting this month. So November tends to be our heaviest rainfall month, but December, January, pretty high. And then it starts to sort of taper off until we get into our really dry periods of July, August, and September. Now, excuse me, now June is starting to fit into that. So we are seeing some climate change results in our weather during the summer as well, where June can be drier and hotter. And, we had that 3-digit heat wave in June, which is extremely unusual and very difficult on plants because it was affecting the new growth on plants that had just leafed out. They were very tender. And so they were very susceptible to this heat damage. So we want to pay attention to this because we want to pick plants that can survive this kind of vacillation and weather. We don't want to have to water all summer long. You can water and should when you need to, but you don't want to have a plant that you have to continually pour water on. It's not economical. It's not resource conservation wisdom to do that. And it's a lot of work. So we're looking for plants that will adapt to the climate that we have, which will probably maintain these patterns, but each of these types of patterns might grow in capacity, that we have more rain, heavier rain in the winter, and maybe drier in the summer. But just as a comparison, we have a lot of cloudy days here, and our rain typically for the Northwest isn't super heavy for most of the year. We have these sort of drizzly days. Drizzle is kind of a common rain pattern here. So we could have 38 inches of rain total for Seattle, but New York City gets 46 inches. So they have actually more rainfall than we do annually. So we're going to talk now about designing a native plant garden. And these are the things that you want to take into consideration first, is to assess your soil. So you want to know what kinds of soil you have. You may have multiple types of soil in your yard. You might have a sandy area in one part and clay in the other, or mixed, or maybe you have a glacial till garden. Lots of Seattle is like that, especially sort of in the middle upper parts, like in shoreline. Tend to be where the glaciers kind of dumped their the till that was coming off the sides of the glaciers, all the rock and tumble. We have different plant communities in the Northwest, and there are lots of great websites with information about how to look at the different zones that there are and how each of these affects the plant communities that grow there. As an example, you can have a dry conifer and deciduous mixed forest. And these are places that often are on like slopes of hills that face Puget Sound, get a lot of western, southwest sun. They could have things like Douglas fir and ocean spray and sword fern in them, which all tolerate a little bit of drought in the summer more than maybe other plants would, like a cedar or some other understory plants. And then you want to apply sound design criteria. You want to make sure you're layering things, you're making gardens 3-dimensional, you want to plan for all seasons. So we're going to go into all of these in a little more detail. Sorry, my computer just froze again.
It sometimes freezes with these really great large pictures.
It does,
It takes a
especially
little time to load.
So now we're talking about soil testing. The Pacific Northwest Soil Survey region done by the USDA Soil Web Survey has lots of information about the different soil types across Washington State. You can look at that to get sort of some generic information. In urban areas, it's not always going to be really obvious because we've altered our soil so much by growth and building and all the moving of soil and bringing new soil in. So you may have a base soil that has been adapted and amended over the years. And maybe you've been doing that yourself as a gardener, changing your soil. So one of the first things that's helpful to know about soil is to do soil testing. You want to look at how acid or alkaline your soil is. You want to look at what kind of soil, the porosity of it, whether you have sand or loam or clay soil. You want to know your nutrient levels, which can help dictate what kind of plants you grow. Some plants don't want a lot of nutrients. Some plants do. And then you definitely want to know how much organic matter you have. Northwest soils tend to be heavy in organic matter, especially areas where there have been a lot of trees, because leaves fall, they litter the ground, even under conifers, and they amend the soil over time, and that can create a lot of organic matter in the soil. So native plants thrive in soils that are slightly acidic, rich in organic matter. This can lead to fungal dominant soil microorganisms, and they can vary in degree of porosity. If you live in Magnolia or Ballard, you might have very sandy soil. In the city of Seattle, if you are on the slopes of Lake Washington, you could have very clay soil. So there's a lot of differentiation that goes on in soil types around the Northwest, and particularly here in King County in our native environment. So take a look. One way you can do that, you can do hand soil jar tests, where you actually take a cup of soil and put it in a jar and put a little bit of dishwashing liquid in there and fill it with water, shake it up for about 5 minutes and let it sit for a couple days. And you will see layers of soil. The sand will be at the bottom, and then the clay, and then the loam, or the cloam, and then the clay, and which is the tightest pore soil. And then you'll have a little bit of organic matter floating on the top. And that can give you percentages of types of soil that you have in your yard. Soil testing can be done through the King Conservation District to find out about your pH, your nutrient levels, your organic matter, and every household can get up to 5 free tests per lifetime per household for the person living there. And you can send those in either all at once to test 5 different areas of your garden, or you can do a test a year to see how soil changes as you amend it and add to it. So we also have these different ecoregions, and we have a variety of geographic regions, including what I showed you in the first slide there of dry conifer and deciduous mixed forest, but there's also conifer and broadleaf evergreen, oak woodlands, riparian forest and shrubland, and scrub wetland. So these types of plant communities vary in soil types and also how much moisture is in the soil. They create their own shade by the kind of dominant plant that's in that area. Most of these have trees that dominate. Ultimately, the shrub is going to be the one that has the least amount of big trees. It's going to be more what you're going to see along the edges of rivers and lakes, and much shorter shrub dominated, forb and perennial dominated. So very different, and you can mimic these in your own garden. So knowing what kind of area perhaps your property used to be in can make a difference. Oak woodland, there are areas in Washington that were dominated by oaks. In Seattle, one of those is the Seward Park area. And so that's still, even though there's a big peninsula full of conifers, there was an oak woodland there at one time, and still there are oaks there that are part of that forest as a legacy to that. So it's good to know a little bit about this, because you can group plants that would grow well together, and they will be more successful growing. The picture on the right is relevant to climate change. There's a project going on where people are moving the giants to Puget Sound, so they're bringing in test redwoods into different parts of the Puget Sound area to see how they do. And this is just a test to see, as climate changes, how are these redwoods going to adapt to this area, and then finding ones that do well here to be able to propagate and move around. So what can you do? How do you do this yourself? You want to look at what plants grow in community together, because it helps you determine what type of soil you need. Or maybe it's the converse. What type of soil you have is going to help dictate what kind of plants you want to get. So you don't want to engineer the soil too much. You need to know the level of light different plants like, and you need to know their moisture needs and tolerances. This is just basic gardening, as you would do for any plant in your garden. And then, fun part, you get to have a little art project and do a planting plan. It's important to map your garden. You can do this in a variety of ways. Google has wonderful satellite imagery of properties that you can take and make prints of, and then you can adapt those to create a planting plan. You can do it all freehand. You can just have the measurements of your property, know where your different utility lines are, you know where things are that are large in the property. Where's the house sit? Where's the sun? What kind of shade is going to be cast, depending on the time of year and the time of day. And you want to look at also what's around you in your neighborhood. So you might have a large building next to you. You may have, the neighbor may have a tree that affects your garden. So you can determine all the things that you place on the map by sort of just doing an inventory of the property and of your neighborhood. And then really importantly, you want to know how the garden is going to be used. Do you want to have food plants? Do you want to have aesthetics, medicinal plants? Do you need resting places? And are you planning to do activities? That will help you decide where to put what, if you're going to put a lawn in, if you're going to have a border that's all, you know, native for the wildlife or native plants that are edible for you. Lots of different ways to look at it. And everybody has a different aesthetic as well. And in the process, you're looking at the soil in all these different places. So here's an example of a base map that's showing where north is. It shows where the winds are coming from, because this is important. In this area, we get a lot of wind out of the north, sometimes northeast, sometimes northwest, but we get lots of weather out of the southwest. So a lot of weather coming up. When they talk about the Pineapple Express, that's heavy, wet rain coming, warm weather rain that's coming out of the south, out of the Pacific from Hawaii. So not unusual for us. A lot of our snows, of course, come in from the northeast or northwest, as well as the northeast. A lot of chilly weather from the northeast. So knowing that will help you sort of gauge, do you want to put, you know, as long as you're putting native plants in your yard, you might as well create functional plantings that can help block wind. It can provide shade, it can provide resting areas, it can, and also provide habitat for your garden. And then as you move on, you're going to start placing things. So in this case, a lawn and a veggie garden kind of go together because they both like the same things: sun, good drainage, a warm spot. And sometimes people will convert lawn into vegetable garden. So that's very typical. But in looking at like where you would put in shrubs and wildlife plants and native plants in particular, you would be looking maybe at these trees and shrubs for screening, that you can create a big wildlife garden, a Pacific Northwest native border that also could do that. You could have a winter garden that has things that bloom early that will help feed the Anna's hummingbirds that are around all winter long. You could have a lot of herbs on the back patio and do sort of your edible garden in the back, and do a native fern garden and it's sort of this dry shade part of the garden. So lots of different ways to approach this, and put in different things that you might benefit from, but will also benefit the environment and wildlife at the same time. So when you are making design considerations, these are the things we're going to look at. You want to choose plants that create layers in the garden because they accommodate wildlife. So wildlife lives in all different layers. Some of them are some birds are ground feeders. Some of them are up in the trees, or they're going up and down tree trunks, or they're hunting for insects. Some of them are fruit eaters. Some of them are looking for nectar in a flower. So you want to have a variety of plants in the garden as well, things that will do different things. And you want to accommodate your aesthetics as well, because everybody has a thing that they like better. They have different sets of color palettes that they like. They have different shapes of leaves. Some people like foliage gardens. I had a garden when I used to live in Northeast Seattle that I couldn't grow very many flowers because it was very shady. So I had some things that flowered but weren't very noticeable. So something like ginger, wild ginger, that has a very cool little sort of purplish flower, but it doesn't show up. It's not like having, zinnias that are blazing away with color in the summer. So you can have different styles for your aesthetics. And you want to think about what is the tallest thing that you want to have in your garden. Some people don't want to have a very tall tree in their garden. Now, trees, evergreens, conifers in particular, are super important for the environment for a variety of reasons. They do have lots of different habitat niches in them. They also manage stormwater really well because they're large and they are still photosynthesizing in the winter, and they can help to protect the soil because they shade out, or they shelter from the rain, so the rain doesn't hit the ground so hard it breaks up in the trees when it falls. And then you don't get this big rush of rain hitting the ground and running off. But some people don't want to have a big Douglas fir sitting right next to their house. There are concerns in storm situations about damage to the property. So, bearing all that in mind, you make your choices about what the tallest thing would be in your garden. And then you scale down from there to include plants that can grow at multiple levels. And you want to, like in this photograph, which isn't all native plants, it was the best image I could find to sort of illustrate the concept. You want to have things kind of going from one to the next. So you have this full palette of plants and not a lot of gaps. You have things that are solid on the ground. There's areas for birds to nest in. There could be areas in the trees for birds to nest in. And you have all this different habitat. And it's important to repeat plants across the landscape so you can kind of see in the background of the words here, the Dusty Miller kind of repeating itself across the landscape. That helps to bring a cohesive look, or at least putting in plants with similar colors kind of scattered through so that it doesn't look like it's all purple in one spot and all yellow in the other. It makes it look better. It makes your eye follow it more, and it's just a better aesthetic overall. And then you want to plan for year-round beauty. So you want to include evergreen, deciduous, and then ephemeral plants, things that would come up in the spring and maybe die back, which could be something like bulbs, or some of the perennials like cyclamen that just come up and then go away. There are lots of deciduous plants we're going to look at in a few minutes here in the Northwest that are native that people don't think about. So think about those as well. Evergreen plants are very familiar to us, especially the native evergreens, but there are many other things that are very attractive. And think in 3-dimension planting, because you don't want to just plant in a straight line. You want to have plants that are interspersed, that give you depth. And that way you can mix in this deciduous plants that can be part of the screen in the winter, because maybe they have a lot of twigginess or beautiful bark, a beautiful framework of limbs and stems on them that would show up against other plants or in between them. They might have really colorful bark, could be different things. Some of them bloom, some of them bear fruit. So we're thinking about year-round, and we're thinking about 3-dimensional at the same time, so that we can get a garden that may change over the season, but will be 3-dimensional all year long. So here's an example of year-round beauty for one type of plant. This is a red stem dogwood. Many of us are familiar with this. There's a lot of cultivars of this plant. There are some that have been hybridized to be bright yellow stems. There are some native, not necessarily to the Northwest, but some native yellow stem dogwoods. There are some that hybrids like winter fire, Arctic fire, that have these bright red stems. Some of them go from red to orange to yellow at the tips. Really incredible beauty. They have a shrubby form, great for wildlife to kind of flit in and out of. A lot of birds will hang out in there. It's a good safe place for them to get away from predators. They are easy to grow. So you see on the left sort of this new spring leafing out, what it looks like, and then the summer, the blooms that develop. These develop into sort of bluish black berries, and then you have this beautiful fall color that comes on them with the red stem and the red leaves, and then in the winter, that striking red stem. And the newer growth is redder than the old growth, so you can recharge these by taking out some of the taller stems and letting the new shoots come up and keep them very red. But it's a very striking plant, and it's pretty all year long, even without its leaves. So here we're going to look at just some pictures for a second to sort of get a feel for what the Northwest plants look like. On the top left, we have the wild ginger, Asarum caudatum, and that's a lovely plant. That's the one I was talking about that has the little purplish flower. In the summer, that's going to be a huge mat of leaf. It kind of dies back a little bit in the wintertime, so it looks a little more sparse like this, but it's still present and still evergreen. Then you have things like the ninebark, the bark in the middle picture. Ninebark is a shrubby deciduous plant that grows to about maybe 8 to 10 feet tall and has white flowers on it, and makes seed capsules that birds will eat, but also it's just a great pollinator plant. The flowers are really attractive to pollinators. And it's also shrubby and good for wildlife to hang out in. The bark is very peely like this and has multiple colors, even on the younger growth. So it's very attractive in the winter because, especially as the sun hits it, it really kind of lights it up. We have obvious Northwest native, our Western red cedar with snow on it. Beautiful evergreen plant, pretty all year long, glistening in the winter with the raindrops or snowdrops on it. Very shiny and green. So very wonderful background plant, and also just sort of specimen plant in the garden. Got the red stem dogwood for the winter. And then we've got willow over here on the right with the yellow stem. So that's an interesting combination. People don't often think about willow for winter beauty, but it has this beautiful bright yellow stems on it. And then you've got, and there are many different species of willows. So some of them have different coloration than others. Some are big, some are small. You can get dwarf versions, a lot of different variety there. And then you have an evergreen huckleberry, and it fruits late in the season. And so this is an early snow with huckleberry with fruit on it. And this is a beautiful evergreen plant that has the red stem, a little bit of red in the leaf in the fall, gets tinged. The more sun it has, a little bit more red it has. And then the new growth is bright red as it grows out as well. But this is a winter palette of what things might look like in your garden that would look really beautiful. Here's spring. And now we have a willow on the left that's starting to flower. So the pussy willows come out, and this is as it's opening up. When they're tight in the bud, they're softer. And there's lots of different kinds, as I said. These are great around ponds or stream banks if you have a water feature in your garden. There's the Mahonia aquifolium, or Oregon grape, on top here. This flowers in the late winter. It's wonderful first food for Anna's hummingbirds in the winter time when there's not much else around. It has a little bit of a fragrance, develops a fruit that you can eat and that birds like to eat as well. And then we've got the red flowering currant, which is also a great winter flower plant because it will develop early in the spring as these leaves are unfolding. Very striking, very gorgeous in the landscape. The leaves are sort of maple-like. It's a very attractive plant, and the hummingbirds love this. Great food for them. Also develops fruit that other birds will eat. We have like the beach strawberry that gets flowers in the spring and will develop fruit later. It's a little trailing ground cover. Dies back a little bit in the winter, but will fill back out and look like this in no time in the spring, followed by a very delectable tiny little strawberries that have a great flavor. And then we have bleeding heart, which is a little bit ephemeral. It comes up early in the spring with this beautiful lacy kind of blue-green foliage, very delicate, and then has these beautiful little heart-shaped flowers that hummingbirds like, other pollinators love. Very attractive and very useful for color and for wildlife as well. Here as we go with summer. So there's more pictures in this image because there are more plants blooming in the summer. So some of these are early summer, some midsummer. We've got ocean spray, which is one of my favorite plants, with those hanging beautiful kind of ivory colored flowers. You've got ceanothus. So there's native ceanothus, there's floris, which has these beautiful, I think blue blossom is the common name, beautiful pale blue flowers. This is pruned into tree shape, but you can have it be shrubby. There's goat's beard, which has sort of that similar kind of poofy flower like an ocean spray shrub does. The maidenhair fern. This is a native dogwood over here on the right. This dogwood actually does have some disease issues in the Northwest. So not always the best plant, but is a beautiful example of one of our native trees, deciduous trees with beautiful flowers on it. And of course, what we're seeing are the sepals that are colorful in the flowers, that center green piece. Trillium, which is a favorite of many people. Lots of different varieties of trillium, but one of the Northwest trillium bottom here with the white flower. We've got a checker mallow. There's Oregon and Henderson's, and this is a Henderson's checker mallow. There's summer bloomers, tall, perennial, great for sort of background beds. I put them in containers in my yard. Bees love them, hummingbirds love them. Mock orange, which has that delectable scent, smells so sweet. Another one of those deciduous shrubs that people think are nondescript, but actually have this fantastic covered in blooms in the summer, early summer. Then we've got, what am I looking at here? I'm sorry. Come over here. This is Lonicera ciliosa. So this is a reddish orange with yellow honeysuckle that blooms throughout the summer for a while. These get edible fruit on them that the birds love, and it grows just like any honeysuckle vine that you would buy as a, like the Japanese honeysuckles and all the ones you would buy in the nursery. And then in that bottom photo, we've got the nine bark with the flowers that I was mentioning before that the bees love. And so that has a beautiful kind of maple leaf as well, like the ribes does, the red flowering currant. So they're very attractive even when they get their leaves on them. They aren't nondescript by any means. And then in the fall, we have all this beautiful fall color that we can get. We are, of course, not like the Northeast where they have incredible, sugar maples and all the red maples. We have a lot of those in our urban areas, which are beautiful, but you can combine them with some of these native plants like the ribes here at the bottom, the red stem dogwood. This is a serviceberry, this bright red one, and then the vine maple at the top with the oranges and yellows and reds. So lots of different colors in our native deciduous plants. And then there are flowers that bloom in the fall that are native, like the aster, Douglas aster, and western yarrow and goldenrod. Also really good bee food for late bees, even honeybees, which are not native here, but they need late flowers to survive and get enough, be able to collect enough pollen. So these are all the kind of color palettes you're going to see during the seasons in the Northwest, and it's quite beautiful. Okay, so choosing native plants for your garden. Start with your favorite native plant list. What do you like best? We're going to show you what Christy and I like best in a second, but what do you like best? See how you can apply it to your map. Think about, learn about what kind of soil type do they like? How much sun do they need? How much water do they need? Where would you put them? If it's something that needs more water than something else, you might want to put it closer to your house so you can take care of it better. Get ideas from your neighborhood. What do you see that's thriving? What might be historical to your neighborhood, like that area around Seward Park where the oak forest was? Visit gardens with native plant settings. There's a link on the resource page to where you can find places to visit native gardens. And then go at different times a year because they're going to look very different at different times a year. You also want to know how big these plants get. So when you're choosing, you need to think about if that tree is going to be a 200-foot tall tree or 10-foot tall tree, and where it really should be placed in the garden. So what are the benefits of native plants? Native fauna recognizes native flora. So they know what plants to look for. You know, a bird that's looking for a particular type of nectar will recognize the plant that has that nectar. Native plants are adapted to our climate that I showed you in those first slides where we're talking about wet winters and dry summers. They're less susceptible to disease and insect issues. That doesn't mean they're insect proof or disease proof. Neither are they drought proof, but what they are is less susceptible for real. So you can have a healthier plant in your garden because it doesn't need as much TLC because it's adapted to growing in this environment. You need to just give it the kind of setting that it likes and water it as much as it needs. Native plants are attractive and they are useful. They can create screening for you. They can create food for you and for wildlife. They will bring in lots of wonderful wildlife to the garden. They can provide you with materials to put in vases and decorate your home, or to cut in the wintertime to make wreaths or greens, just to bring in so you can smell the wonderful smell of them. And then with climate change, we should be also looking further south for plants that are down in Oregon and California. One of the studies that's going on right now with City Light and Puget Sound Greenways is they're bringing in cultivars of things like Douglas fir that are native here, but they're bringing in the ones that are growing in Oregon, Southern Oregon, to see how they do here because they are more adapted to the kind of climate we are looking to be seeing in the future. So hopefully they will be able to withstand climate changes that are happening here. So native plants are adapted to this. They can tolerate a lot of extremes. We need to monitor plant resilience with climate change. And that study that I mentioned is in Stossel Creek. That's a test site near Duval. They're bringing in also the California redwoods, like in that movie, The Giants slide. So you can do some of this experimentation yourself. And you could bring in plants that are from Southern Oregon and see what they do. Try some of the manzanitas that we see in Southern Oregon and Northern California. Wildlife gardening is a big reason to have native plants. Hummingbirds that live over here, the Annas, nest in our gardens. We have 3 other species of hummingbirds that we see during the summer that nest in our gardens. And so we want to be good caretakers so that they have what they need to do so. A lot of people call, I work with the garden hotline at Tilt, a lot of people call and say, I have all this moss in my yard and I want to get rid of it. And we try to, help people resolve where the moss can grow and where maybe we can help them get rid of it, because often it's growing in areas of the lawn that are too shady for the lawn to be growing. So instead, encourage the moss, because the moss is used for many, many bird nests, in particular Anna's hummingbirds, who use moss and lichen and spider silk and other materials to create their teeny tiny nests. So these things are part of their habitat. They need them to be successful in breeding and continue to be part of our environment as well. We need to make sure that we have food sources, which can include nectar, seeds, fruits, and then sometimes leaves, depending on what kind of animal it is. Some of the birds we have here, like the great blue heron, actually take limbs out of trees that are dead and broken and build their nests with them. And you see them flying in nesting season in the spring with these huge limbs in their beaks as they fly off to the tree to build their nest. And then we also want to make sure that some of this is good for insects as well as the birds. Birds are obvious to us. We're noticing them. They're pretty. Humans tend to have a more adversarial relationship with insects, but many of them are super important. Less than 5% of the insects in our garden are actually harming our plants. And in the Northwest, we don't have a lot of dangerous insects to worry about for our own health. So, we should welcome them in and make sure that we have materials and spaces for them, hollow twigs where native bees can nest. Leaf cutter bees will actually take notches out of leaves, so being tolerant of that so that they can have what they need. They help to pollinate our plants as well. So here's the top, I don't know how many I put in here, 12 list of plants. Some of these are on my favorite list and some on Christie's, but these are very ubiquitous trees in the Northwest that are also quite attractive. We have the ocean spray that I mentioned with that beautiful kind of ivory flower. It's an indicator that summer has arrived. It is, does look like foam on the ocean, and it's a beautiful little deciduous shrub. It is pollinated by insects, and it's especially loved by Pacific tree frogs who actually, are up in the stems of it. And the bleeding heart, which is herbaceous and will come up and then die back again late in the summer. It has these beautiful reddish pink flowers that the hummingbirds are attracted to. Vine maple, which is also very common here in the Northwest. In the 60s, it was a very common plant to add to landscapes in the Northwest. So anybody's house that was built in the 60s very likely had a vine maple planted in it, but they're a great tree. They don't get very tall. They're great for wildlife. Birds use the twigs for nesting, and chipmunks and squirrels will use these if you have chipmunks in your area to cache seeds. They grow naturally along forest edges and are an understory tree in a light forest. Okay, and then one of my favorites, the evergreen huckleberry. This is a beautiful, also landscape shrub that was, one of the 1960s favorites. But you can see why. It has shiny green leaves. It's evergreen. It has a very nice shape usually, easy to trim and get it to bush out. Very well behaved, very few problems. Has shiny, deep green leaves with new growth that's bright red, and the stems are red. And then it gets little white flowers that develop into an edible fruit that we can eat, also attracts birds to it. The red flowering currant, which has these pendulous pink flowers in the fruit later that attracts birds. This has a little bit of a interesting smell that some people don't like. I happen to like it. It's kind of a spicy, some people call it skunky smell. So bear that in mind. If it's a smell you don't like, you might not want to place it right by your front door. Where you're passing it by, but put it somewhere where you can watch hummingbirds in it. And then the trillium, which is a very beloved plant in the Northwest. It takes it a while to bloom. It's an herbaceous perennial. You want to establish an area where you can really get them growing, so you have a nice display of them in the spring. And they are a host for moth larvae, and also there's different animals that will eat the berries, and bees pollinate them. So they are a pretty active wildlife plant. We have the beach strawberry, which I showed you, which wonderful fruit on it, but it also hosts moths and butterflies. We have red stem dogwood, which I showed you in the wonderful changing of the seasons. This is wonderful shelter for birds. It makes great thickets. It's browse for a lot of animals. If you have properties, I had a client that lived on Bainbridge that we would plant things like this in willow out in the pasture area where the deer would come by as browse for them so that they could eat it. It doesn't hurt it very much. It just sort of makes it bush out. The sword fern, another very common Northwest plant, wonderful plant, has a lot of variety in where it can grow. It can take some sun, it can take shade, dry soil, wet soil. It's browse for a lot of animals as well, and a lot of birds use the materials for nesting. The dried fronds are used a lot. Then the 9-bark in bloom here, which has those pretty maple-like leaves and those flowers with all the stamens sticking out that the insects love. So a lot of insects favor this. The nectar is also favored by birds, and the fruit is eaten by birds, and it has that fun, colorful stems in the wintertime. The Oregon grape that we looked at the picture of, multi-stemmed, lots of different, also different species of this. So you can have the Mahoney aquifolium, which is this tall one. You can have a low one. And then in one that's even lower, that's more of a ground cover that hugs the ground. They all have this beautiful yellow flower on it, great for hummingbirds. The fruit is edible. You can make jam out of it. My sister used to make wine out of it when she lived in the Northwest still. And a lot of birds and animals will eat this fruit. And then Western columbine is a beautiful little herbaceous plant that will self-seed, and you can let it sort of pop up around the garden where it's successful growing. Then, you know, just let it migrate a little bit. It will surprise you where it ends up. It's easy to pull out if you don't want it certain places, and it's not invasive in the sense that there's tons of seedlings. There's just a few every year. Great for many species of moths and butterflies, and forage for bees and hummingbirds. So those are sort of the, you know, big highlight plants. There's many others, a lot of really unusual plants that you can look for and try. And there's native plant sales, of course, where you can find these in lots of places to get them. But another thing to think about is what, you know, do you want to grow plants that will feed you as well? So, you know, there's a rich diet of variety of plants in our forests and on our prairies and areas where we have been harvesting plants for many years. And the Native American folks who've lived here for millennial times have been eating and basically hosting these plants and helping them to grow for a very long time. So we're fortunate that we have this wonderful array, many types of berries, so huckleberries, salmonberry, elderberries, serviceberries, strawberries, thimbleberries. All of these are wonderful edible plants that also make good, interesting landscape plants. Things like salmonberry and thimbleberry, you want to keep in mind that they can migrate in the landscape. They grow by underground stem or rhizome. So you want to put them somewhere where you can let them be a little wild and spread, or you control them a bit. If you've ever grown raspberry, you'll know what I mean. This is very similar. They have a similar growth. Currants, nettles are edible. You can harvest the new growth and have a little nettle patch in your garden, and they're quite decorative. Just put it somewhere where you're not going to be running into it when it's mature, so you don't get the stinging nettle effect. The fiddleheads of ferns also eaten when they're new. You can have native crab apples as well, and use the crab apple to make like jellies and different kinds of sauces to put over your food. And then mint, there's varieties of mint that are native to the Northwest that like to grow around riverbanks. They like wet soil. And again, this is a spreading plant, so bear that in mind. Maybe put it where it can spread, or put it in containers where it's not going to be a big issue for your garden. There's a lot of medicinal plants. I'm not going to go into great depth about what they all do, but most of these are things that can help with, you know, the common cold and congestion, that kind of thing. Conifer tips, cottonwood buds. The buds of cottonwood are extremely fragrant, and you basically infuse them in oil, and you have this wonderful oil that you can use to make salves with. Things like yarrow also you can use to make salves. Violet flowers make a wonderful little tea. It's very wonderful little taste, and those are sort of calming herbal effects. And then willow bark is, of course, what was, you know, used originally to make aspirin. I did that actually in my chemistry class at UW, where we made aspirin ourselves from salicylic acid, and but willow bark was the original originator of that product. So it has some pain management facility. But all of these things, you know, are all around us, and there's tons of herbalists and people, if you want to learn more, that can teach you about all this. Really fascinating. And if you've never smelled that cottonwood bud, and it's just a wonderful smell. So here's our list of native plants. You'll see we have some things in common. So the things we have in common, I highlighted. We both like the red flowering currant and the maidenhair fern or the spleenwort. Christy likes the red huckleberry, which is the deciduous version. It's a very delicate, beautiful little plant, hard to grow here, likes to grow in wood and old tree stumps. If you can get that going, great. You should try it because it's a beautiful little plant. Has tiny little red berries and beautiful little green stems. And I love the evergreen huckleberry. I love what it looks like in the winter with the rain on it. It's shiny and bright and like little jewels, the raindrops on there. And then Christy loves that ceanothus with the blue flowers on it. Those ceanothus are covered in insects when they're blooming. They are super insect magnet. And the orange honeysuckle, also a wonderful hummingbird plant and insect plant, great for butterflies. The tall Oregon grape, again, good for the hummingbird. Henderson's checker mallow, which is really beautiful, has that beautiful little flower. The seed capsules, you know, you want to let those develop and collect them, and then you can plant them in different parts of your garden. The red flowering currant, which we both like, has that beautiful flower, which you're seeing in the background here. And then for me, that ocean spray is probably my #1 plant. It's not super colorful. It's just got brown stems when it's bare, but I love the shape of the leaf and I love the flower on it. And it just reminds me of summer when it's blooming. I love deer fern, which are sort of a little mini sword fern, kind of. They're a little more decorative than a sword fern and hug the ground. And I love the Pacific dogwood. They're like little jewels in the woods when they're blooming. Goat's beard, again, I love that plumy flower. Also a sign of summer. And then I love the vine maple because I like it at all times of year. And then bleeding heart because it's so beautiful when it's in flower, just kind of a little jewel. So here's some of the ones that I mentioned in that list that we hadn't shown you yet. So we're seeing the goat's beard on the top left, the little red huckleberry, the red, the honeysuckle, dogwood, the ceanothus, and then this Henderson's checker mallow, and then the maidenhair fern. Just another example of the beauty of our native plants. This will take a second. There we go. So now we want to talk about how to plant. So if you're planting in an urban area, you always want to make sure that you're not trying to dig a big hole where there's underground wires or lines or something that you're going to disturb, gas line. So call before you dig. The 811 number is super important. And then when you're digging your planting hole, rule of thumb is always to dig a planting hole. It's twice as wide, but only as deep as the root ball of your plant. So you want it to be twice as wide as the root ball, but not very deep, because only the depth that the plant is already in soil, you can very easily sink a plant too deeply in the soil, and the soil will go up around the crown of the plant, and it essentially suffocates it. It can cause rot at the base of the tree where the trunk is, where the bark is. And bark is there to protect the tree from rot, but by planting it too deeply, you would be making it susceptible to rotting out. So the bottom picture shows where the trunk flare is, and that's what we're trying to protect. We don't want the soil to go up around that. So that 2 to 4 inch layer of mulch that they're showing there is not put up against the tree trunk, it's put at a distance. You need to monitor that though, because you need to make sure that it's not falling in against the tree trunk. You want to make sure that the root ball is firmly down in the ground. And then you backfill, make sure you take the air pockets out. Now, one of the important things to know is in the top picture, we show a plant with lots of girdling roots. And so if you were to leave a plant in that form without cutting through it, it's just going to go, the roots will continue to wrap around that root ball and won't go out into the soil around them. And that's what we call girdling roots. They will develop into large roots where they can actually strangle the tree. So putting it in the ground, settling it gently, don't put it too deep, twice as wide, backfill, and then settle the soil. You can use water to settle the soil. If it's a small hole, I use my hands and I sort of use my fingers to just gently press. I don't push down with my fist. I actually want to use my fingers so that I'm keeping it a little bit loose. And then you're going to put mulch over the top using some kind of organic material like wood chips or leaves. Make sure to water, because even if it's raining, that rain isn't going to necessarily get in as deep into all the areas where you disturb the soil and put the new root ball in. So here's a better close-up of how to plant. So same depth as roots. You can, if you're doing a bare root tree, put a mound of soil in the bottom, and bare root are available in the spring, and you can get some great deciduous plants, bare root at that time of year, that are really cheap and bigger than a plant you would buy in a pot or a container. And on the right, it's just showing the different forms that you might get a tree in. And then here are some more examples of cutting the roots. So even with a 4-inch pot, like what you're looking at on the right or on the left, you can take that and actually you hold it on two sides and sort of pull it apart, which rips the bottom, and then flip it around and pull it apart again. And that makes kind of a big break on the bottom. Or you could take a knife. On the bottom of that plant, I would make a big X, and then I would cut into the sides like you're seeing in these other photos. You can use a shovel, you can use a knife, you can use pruners, whatever you have that's good and sharp and clean, that's going to cut the roots. Wherever you cut roots, new roots will develop once you put it in the ground. Our soil is warm enough during the fall. That's why fall is a great time to plant. You can put them in the ground and the roots will start to grow where you've severed them, because that stimulates growth. It's meristematic tissue that will start to grow and develop new roots into the soil. And then by spring, when it needs to grow out and support new growth, it will have a good, decent root system. So water in the summer for the first few years, and then check after that. You need to make sure that if we're having a crazy drought, that you are watering enough to keep plants alive. I had some shrubs along my driveway, been in this house this is the 4th year. And I'm just, I think, completing 4 years this month. So I never watered them since I've been in this house. And, it's not a long history, but I needed to water them this summer because they are adult, mature. It's lilac and a mock orange and Caria, which is not a native, but has a native-like look. And they didn't like, especially the mock orange, did not like this drought that we had this year. So pay attention. Even big trees like a Western red cedar might need a drink in the summer if we have a long period of no rain. So do plant in the fall. Take advantage of the winter rain to develop that deep root system. They're going to be more resilient during drought weather. Use sprinklers that spray low, like this one in the top picture. That's what I call a rose sprinkler. It's been used in rose gardens a lot, but it comes in different patterns. This is a round pattern. It could be rectangular or square. You can turn it down very low and just let it hit the root system around a new planting, and move it around to get to the spot you need to plant. You don't want sprinklers that are up in the air too much. You lose water to evaporation and also to drift. The wind might push it and it may not hit where you're trying to water. The gator that you see on the bottom is used for a lot of new tree plantings so that the water seeps in slowly and helps to keep the ground moist as this tree is getting established. So those are easy because you just put them around the tree trunk and then you fill the bag with water and just let it seep in, and you just check it as needed. You want to add compost as needed when you're mulching. Replace mulch as needed. Avoid piling the mulch against the trunk. And you don't need to add, for native plants, you don't need to add fertilizers to them. You want them to adapt to your native soil. So if you are going to amend a bed that you think is too rocky or too dry, or maybe you carved it out of a lawn you want to add compost to the entire planting bed and mix it in and then plant your plants so that they get adapted to that soil. Leave your leaves. That's a great time of year to start collecting them. If you have too many, put them in plastic bags, save them to mulch with later. Anything, you know, that has been impacted by your animals or has been in a street gutter, you might put in the curbside bin instead. But the good leaves that are falling, that are clean, these are wonderful mulch materials. We send them away, which is a fine thing to do, but you have this free material you can use as a mulch. And your tree, of course, is adapted to, you know, using its own material because it created it. All right, and this is more about the Soak It Up program.
Great. So the City of Shoreline offers rebates up to $2,000 for shoreline property owners to either build a rain garden or to convert their lawn, a bed of invasive weeds, or some hardscape, like one of those classic old shoreline patios that so many of us have, if you're willing to convert any of that to native landscaping. So in order to participate in this program, you need to have a site visit to determine eligibility, and that would be with me. But this is a really great program if you are looking to maybe give your property just a makeover for something new, or if you're really looking to harness some of those environmental benefits that native plants bring. I will say that with both the rain garden and the native landscaping bed, you do not have to have 100% native plants. We're looking for 50% natives or more, but it's a really great program, and we've seen some really excellent gardens, including this one right here. This is actually a rain garden, and I love this one. You can't even tell it's a rain garden at this point because she's got so many beautiful established plants all throughout it. So if you're interested, please, I'm going to put my email into the chat box. Send me an email and we can get a site visit on the calendar. Thank you.
Monarda in that picture is gorgeous. So that, I'm going to go back there for a second. This red flower, this Monarda bee balm is wonderful for bees, but hummingbirds go crazy over it. You can put a chair just right next to it, you know, and relax in it and just sit and watch the hummingbirds in the summer. They don't even flinch because they're so interested.
It's such a magical looking plant too.
Yeah, it's very cool. And it smells good. It's in the mint family. You can actually do things like make tea out of it. So resources, this is a wonderful plant list. There's millions of others. This is just the stuff I use the most. There are foraging books. There's medicinal plant books. The Plants of the Pacific Northwest Coast, Pojar McKinnon is a classic, just a guidebook. Basically, you could take it when you're hiking. You can just flip through it to see what plants grow here. They also include things that are here to stay, like dandelion, you know, understanding that it's part of the flora of the Northwest now, but they will tell you, you know, which things are native, and almost everything in there is native. The Xerces Society has some great books about how to build gardens that attract butterflies and native pollinators. And then, of course, the Flora of the Northwest, Pacific Northwest, Hitchcock, University of Washington Press. That's a classic, you know, tome on, you know, what is here. So check out these books. I don't know what the status of the Center for Urban Horticulture is right now in Seattle, but they have a wonderful library. If they're open, you can sit in there and read books and check some of these things out. Many of them are probably available from the public libraries, King County and Seattle, and you can probably get them through the, you know, online sources as well. And then all these websites, some of them I referenced in the talk. There are some website links throughout the talk as well that you can look at. All of these will help you to learn more. The King Conservation Districts, the Snohomish Conservation Districts both have plant sales with native plants in bundles. Usually you get like 5 or 10 for a certain amount of money. They're less expensive. It's a fundraiser, helps their programming, but it also helps you get bulks of plants into the garden. So you're not just buying like one, you know, red stem dogwood. You could buy 5 to 10 of them and put a little swath in. The Washington Department of Ecology erosion control site is fabulous. It used to be in their website. Now it's this PDF version, which is a compilation of the old web pages. but it's great because it talks about the different kinds of slides that can happen on slope properties, and also what plants work well on slopes and why, because they have different kinds of networks of roots, and some plants like knotweed, some of the invasive plants, if you were here last week that we talked about, that actually have these root systems that can help bring a root hillside down, and also are bare in the winter and allow for erosion to happen. This little Washington.edu thing I found about native plants is pretty basic, little Native Plants 101 paper that's good to visit or to read. And then the Visiting Gardens site from Washington Native Plant Society. Great ideas of display gardens, some of which are not, just here in this area, so you can travel a little bit. Lots of fun. And then this is our contact information. As I said, I work with the Garden Hotline, and so we're there also to answer your questions about these things. You can call us if you have questions about specific types of plants or where to find things, or just want to discuss your ideas with us as well. We're happy to help.
Great. Thank you so much, Laura. And I'm just going to add on to what you said about the Garden Hotline. If you're here in Shoreline, or if you live in King County, it is a fabulous resource. I have taken pictures of like a weird leaf that I wasn't sure what was going on, and I've gotten, advice about, what's growing on my leaf, what's going on with my tree. They can help with any sort of question you have about what plants might work in a space, what problems you might have going on in the garden, and just lots of expert advice around how to deal with those problems naturally, so you don't have to dump a whole bunch of chemicals on it and ruin your garden or harm yourself. So we're so fortunate to have that here in King County. So thanks for being a part of that, Laura.
Yeah, it's super fun, I gotta say. Mm-hmm. I get to have a job that actually helps me continue to learn and talk to people about plants. What's better than that? I'm looking at the chat section. Somebody mentioned Go Natives, and I do want to echo that. Go Natives and Shoreline is fabulous nursery to buy native plants. We actually have a pollinator hillside at the Rainier Beach Urban Farm at Tilth down in Rainier Beach in Southeast Seattle that the hotline manages, and we're continuing to plant into that hillside, natives and non-natives, and including some weeds that we want people to understand are helpful for pollinators. And we have bought most of our plants from Go Natives for that garden. They have lots of different wonderful things.
Wonderful. Yeah, we're lucky to have them here in Shoreline. So please, everyone, continue to use the Q&A function for your questions. And I see we have some in the chat. I also see that Janet has had her hand raised now for quite some time, very patiently. So Janet, I'm going to go ahead and unmute you if you've still got a question. Oh, I've got to ask you to unmute. You must unmute yourself.
Christy, do we want to go back to a different page here that somebody want to look at?
Sure.
What do you think? Which page?
Well, so maybe Janet, I'll try coming back to you in just a moment. But if you could actually go back to maybe we can take it from the top. I know there were a lot of questions about the soil testing.
Oops, hit the wrong one, sorry. Okay.
So I think, some of the big questions around soil testing were, so in King County, we have King Conservation District, which will provide those free soil tests for other folks here in Washington. Is that an offer that the other conservation districts do? They
don't all do it, no, sadly. I don't know anybody else who's doing that right now. You can get a pretty inexpensive test from the University of Massachusetts, which is kind of odd because you send it across the country, but they do a great soil test. It's I haven't checked the price this year, but it's in the $25 range. And it's all nutritional analysis, plus they measure the lead levels in your soil. King Conservation District does not measure metals or other toxins, but you can add, for those who can get the free soil test, you can add, I think, $20 to $25 to have the lab also test for toxins if you want to.
Okay.
There are lots of soil labs, though. We have the hotline on our website, which I was deeply embedded in. Again, apologies. there is a resource page that has linked to a document called Soil Resources for Edible Gardening, and that has lists of labs on it.
Great. Thank you. And I believe early on, maybe even ahead of the soil assessment, when we were talking about the changes in our climate and just the climate that we have here in the Northwest, Tony was asking for some of those resources. Do you mind? So we'll be sending out these slides to everyone and also posting this webinar. Would you be able to add some of the links to those resources?
Sure.
Okay.
And also I noticed in the chat box, somebody asked about their cedar tree in reference to climate change. This comes up, and that there was a lot of flagging or the brown leaves on it. And all conifers will flag, what we call flagging, which is the leaves turn brown and drop off. They just don't drop them all in the fall like deciduous trees do, but they have to recycle and put out new leaves and drop old ones. They did do it more this year because it was so dry. So that isn't unusual to see. It's not necessarily a danger sign. It's just something to keep your eye on. You know, we don't want our cedars to dry out too much. So that's why I say for some cedars, sometimes in the summer, you need to give them supplemental water.
Mm-hmm. That's great. Yeah. If your tree roots are not within a lawn that you're watering, then I've heard the recommendation is if we're really getting over 80 degrees, or maybe even just once a month to do a nice slow trickle around the roots.
Yeah, and that's a good point, Christy. The lawn, if you're watering your lawn and your tree roots extend into that area, that part of the tree root is getting water.
Thank you. Okay, from the chat here, is it possible to find or buy clay soil to add to a very sandy space?
Compost, add compost. You don't want to mix sand and clay, you mix cement. So don't do that. Add compost, that will actually help. Sand is very porous, big pore spaces. You're trying to add a material that will blend with it naturally. So organic matter to mineral content will create a nicer soil. So just add compost to that.
Great, thank you, Laura. And I think that you touched on this a little later after this question was posted in the chat, but in terms of contacting utility companies to identify pipes and lines, you would do that before planting trees or doing really any earthwork in the garden, correct?
Yes, yes. If you're planting small things, you don't need to worry about it. It's for things that are, you know, deeper in the soil. You may not know, like my old house where I had the, you know, shadier garden and most of the foliage garden, the sewage line came out of the back of the house and was an old concrete sewer line. We ended up having to have that all replaced because it was broken because there was a sequoia tree there and some other shrubs that had, you know, grown into it. But if I were to try to dig right there, I could have broken that doing that. So you need to know where things are, and you know, your sewage line may be harder to find if it's old in particular, but, you know, do your best. You especially want to know where gas and electrical things are.
Mm-hmm. Thank you. And that person was also wondering that there was a tree on their property, and it was 20 years ago that this incident occurred, but the tree was poisoned in order to get rid of it. And then, so they've been concerned about planting any vegetables in that area. Do you have any, is there any sort of like rule of thumb on when an area would be safe to work in again?
It depends on what the chemical was that was used. So some chemicals have different half-lives as to how long it takes them to break down. Some things break down fast in organic soils. For instance, when you're soil testing and you've had a place where there's been hydrocarbons like gasoline or oil, that's going to go away faster than metals, which really, you know, don't change much. So it depends on the herbicide that was used. If you know what it was, you can call us at the hotline and we can help you do some research on that and try and figure it out.
Okay, great. And I see that Maggie McKenna has her hand raised. Maggie, if you want to go ahead and unmute, you can ask your question. Oh, you had it for a moment. There we go. Okay, Maggie, go ahead and continue trying to figure out how to get yourself unmuted. And while you're working on that, we'll go to one of these other questions. Jessica asked that she's got her ceanothus for about 4 years now, and she's wondering if it's too late to train it as a standard. She likes the shape of the tree that you had shown for summer interest in particular. I like that too. Thanks for asking, Jessica.
It would depend on the shape of it now. That's a good one to send a hotline as an image. Because we need to see what it looks like. Basically, what you would be doing is removing the lower branches. And you just do that slowly until you ended up with a trunk on it. If it's multi-stemmed, we'd want to work with you on how to determine which stems you would take away and when. Because that's a single trunk, but sometimes they can be multiple stemmed and low to the ground where they're branching out like that. So I'm trying to get to that picture. There it is. So you can kind of see this actually might be multiple stem too. So you could do it that way as well. But if you had a single stem on it and then it branches higher, but basically you're removing the lower branches as you go, as it grows.
Great, thank you, Laura. And Maggie, do we have you now?
Yes, I hope so.
Yes, we do. Perfect.
Yeah, I was just wondering with the information people heard tonight, if anyone's decided on what they're going to do or any native plants that they're going to try planting in their garden. Can anybody share that or put it in the chat?
Yeah, that would be great. Thank you, Maggie. If folks want to put that into the chat, I think that would be best, unless you have a really grand idea that you want to share and inspire the group with, then I totally encourage you to raise your hand as well. I will just say, I think the plant for me that I've noticed throughout this past month and this presentation is the Douglas aster, and just how long those beautiful purple flowers seem to last. I think that's the one I'm going to be throwing into my garden ASAP. Yes, they really have nice bunches. You can only see the zoom in here, but it's really a nice clustering of flowers. All right, thank you, Maggie. Is there anything you're going to be putting into the garden?
Oh, I'm very partial to the ocean spray.
Ah, wonderful.
Good choice. Great, thank you, Maggie. All right, so we had another comment from Jessica, question. So a lot of her native plants seem to be more susceptible to both bunnies and slugs. And she's just wondering if others have really experienced this. And I'm sure is maybe wondering if there's anything that could be done about the young natives getting chewed up.
It's hard. Shrubby things are going to have less damage from slugs, but maybe the bunnies like to eat them. Some things that are shrubby, it's not going to be the end of the world if bunnies snip branches off, because basically they're pruning them and they will branch out for that. But bunnies also like to eat things that are edible, like in your edible garden as well. So they like tender things. So anything that's sort of a tender, delectable young growth may be susceptible to both of them. Some things, but mammals are always more difficult. People worry more about insects, but actually mammals do more damage and are harder to control. So we do a lot of sometimes caging and staging plants in certain ways to keep the bunnies out of them until they can get big enough to withstand damage. Or having repellents in the garden. Some people do really well with certain kinds of repellents. There are urine repellents that are from different kinds of wildlife that might scare bunnies away. Having other animals in the garden, like a dog, could scare them away, that kind of thing. Slugs, you can do trapping. You can use beer traps or yeast traps around plants, especially if it's like a really delicate plant that's trying to emerge, like a bleeding heart or something. You put beer traps in around them, and the slugs will prefer the beer and drown in them, and then you just bury it and start over again until the plant is big enough that it's okay if there's a few snips, happening. If you have specific plants that are bothering, again, I really would recommend talking to us at the hotline, because we can help with that as well, specifically, and kind of go through them one by one. Basically, it's a matter of just trying to use barriers to protect things, and then use some kinds of trapping systems sometimes. But yeah, rabbits are getting very populated here in the Puget Sound area. There's way more rabbits in the Seattle area than there used to be in most neighborhoods now. And we, as a result, we're also seeing a lot more coyotes, which eat them. So sometimes we'll see a rise in rabbit population, and that might drop a little bit as well as the coyote population picks up.
Thank you. Tony's wondering, so a lot of the natives that we're most familiar with are understory plants, but she's got a yard full of sun, and she's wondering where could she find maybe some resources to find some really good full sun plants or even partial sun.
So any book that has information about native plants will have information about full sun. Some of the things we've shown here will adapt to both. So ribes and red stem dogwood, amelanchier, pine maple, anything you actually see on this page, all can grow in the sun. In particular, these flowers are full sun plants. So there are a lot of meadow flowers, the checker mallow. Think about things that would grow in meadows. There are native grasses that you can convert areas. I didn't even really focus on that here, but you can convert areas to sort of meadow gardens as well, with native grasses and a lot of these perennials or annuals like Clarkia. There's some really fun annuals that grow in the hills that are really easy to grow. Let's see, what else have we got here? If I can get this to move. Strawberries do well in the sun. Ribes can. Willows are great in the sun. There again, the red stem dogwood. The evergreen huckleberry can handle some sun as long as it's not like blazing hot against a brick building in the west. The nine bark is great in the sun. So many of these deciduous plants, mock orange, are actually good for sun. It's a lot of these evergreen plants that we're more familiar with in the Northwest that don't like that really hot sun. And you know, when it gets hot here, it gets very hot. So mock orange, the honeysuckle, the ocean spray is a little sort of borderline. So is goat's beard. You should keep a little shade on that. The ceanothus is full sun. The dogwood is an edge tree. I wouldn't put it in blazing hot sun, but it can take sort of a dappled setting. So there's lots of things for sure. And all those books can tell you in the native plant website that the county manages will define that for you as well. So lots of ideas there.
Thank you, Laura. So I see there's a question here. What is a rain garden? And I would be happy to give an explanation of what that is. And Laura, I think I'll give you a chance to look at the questions in the Q&A. We do have quite a few. So if there's anything that you think is suitable just to type as a response,
Sure.
I'll give you an opportunity to do that now. So great question on what a rain garden is. A rain garden is it looks like a shallow bowl. It's normally about 6 inches deep. It can be up to 12 inches deep. But the purpose of a rain garden is we are taking a downspout from your home, a downspout or some other area that's collecting rain, such as a driveway. And we're going to actually take that water and then put it into the rain garden itself. So we'll connect the downspout most typically into the garden. And so what happens is when it rains, you're going to have a temporary pond. That rain garden is amended with really absorbent soil. And so what happens is it fills up a little bit with water and then it sucks it down into the ground through that absorbent soil and then returns it to groundwater. Rain gardens are really excellent choices for many homes, but a lot of the folks that participate in our program are experiencing some type of drainage issue with a downspout, or they just want to disconnect it and get it, so it's not flowing into the right of way. So it's not flowing down to the storm drains for those environmental reasons. But it's a really excellent way to create a nice garden. With the rain garden, a unique feature of it as well is that because you have the bottom of the ponding area where it's ponding up just during a rainstorm, you have plants that like really, really wet feet. So you have a unique variety of plants that go in that area. And then along the slopes and along the tops of the rain gardens too, it gets progressively just a little bit drier. So you get this variety of plants throughout the rain garden that like slightly different things. We've got some really great resources on our website about what rain gardens are. And so I'll go ahead and in the chat, I'll put the link to that as well, so you can learn more. And if this sounds again like something you're interested in, please send me an email. I would be happy to chat more with you about our Soak It Up program and pass on any resources I have related to it as well.
Great.
Have I given you some time, Laura?
Yeah, I answered one of them. I'm going to answer this one about different redwood species. What is the appeal of bringing in different redwood species into Washington? Is it for wildlife benefit? Just curious, from Jessica. Yeah, partly, but mostly it's because redwoods are adapted to a climate that's going to be more like what our climate's changing to. And so they could be successful here. They already are. We grow sequoia and sequoia dendron here, which are the giant sequoias and the redwoods. Anyway, I have 2 giant sequoias in my garden in Northeast Seattle. They did just fine. And there were redwoods in the park at Matthews Beach Park, which was just up the trail from me. So they already grow well here. I like the idea, though, that they're doing at Stossel Creek, which is to bring in the same species of trees that we have here, Jenner species, the Douglas fir, that are grown in climates that are drier than ours, so that they will adapt to, they'll be more successful here. Because then we're not changing too much of the flora, and the animals that are native here already know what a Douglas fir is, and they'll know what to do with it. So I think that's a great idea. I think redwoods are also fine. I don't think that they are unnecessarily should become the dominant tree that we're changing to, but see if we can adapt our Douglas tree forests to ones that will manage the climate. So that's what I think about that one. The colorful cultivars of 9-bark don't all have the same wildlife value now, but the native one is quite beautiful by itself. So, you know, what I usually do, because I like the cultivars and they're very colorful, I have some of both usually, or if I'm, you know, designing in a garden, I will favor that. I like the purplish and the new red growth on some of the hybrids. But you can look those up individually and see which ones, the flowers, as long as they're flowering and they have pollen and nectar in them, they're still going to have that insect power that the native one does. And then Emma wants to know, how can you determine how much sunshade an area of your yard gets? Yeah, it's hard to watch it all day long. You kind of can extrapolate by how your house sits on the property, where the sun's coming from, you know, different times of day that you are there. Just make notes about what you're seeing. I know in my backyard, I get a lot of sun in the backyard, but it moves. So there's sort of this, as it's moving to the south and then going around to the west in the summer, I get different shade bands. So I'll have one swath that's bright sun, and sometimes the whole yard is full of sun. And then as we changed and started to get shorter days, I noticed that half the yard would be in sun and half the yard would be in shade in the fall. So there's some variety that happens. You just have to sort of look at it now and then when you are there to sort of get a glimpse. You know, it doesn't mean you have to look at it every day. You just want to get a glimpse of what it's doing at different times of the year. You can also tell by how your plants are behaving. So some of my plants reach for the light in different parts of the yard where they don't in others. So you can kind of experiment with that as well if you're not there to be able to look at it. But knowing how the sun moves in the sky, it comes up very far northeast, and then it goes very high in the sky, makes a high arc, and then sets very far to the northwest in the summer. And then in the winter, it comes up further south in the east and makes a very low arc in the sky. So sort of try to imagine what that might look like and where your shade would be, what buildings might cause it, or trees. Oh, mountain beavers. They're very difficult. Like I said, mammals are difficult. A lot of times what people do with mountain beavers is protect their plants from them. I don't have a great answer for them. They are difficult. The Washington State Department of Fish and Wildlife has a great set of fact sheets about living with wildlife. I would look at their site because they're going to have the most up-to-date info. They're always gathering info on how people are dealing with different mammals and birds that we consider problematic residents because we clash with them in our urban areas. And then they also have information about trapping and what's legal to do. And sometimes, you know, you can trap certain animals and release them. I don't know if there's any repellents that work on them. They are one of the more problematic ones. Christy might, do you have any information about mountain beavers?
I don't. No, I'm sorry. I could,
Yeah.
if there's something, if you're in Shoreline and you're looking for more information, please feel free to shoot me an email, Bob, and I can ask around to see if there's anything, if we have a stance on it. But no, I don't have any additional information on that.
And so Ballard has a big problem with that too. I know Shoreline, trying to think of where else I've heard. Can't think off the top of my head, but yeah, they are pretty successful little critters.
Mm-hmm. Great. Well, I'm loving everyone who added the all the plants that they're thinking of incorporating. Thank you for that. I think that's all of the questions. Please raise your hand or repaste into the Q&A or your comments if I've missed your question. I see one new one.
Somebody asked if the evergreen huckleberry was edible, and Christy, you answered that. Yeah.
Yeah.
Absolutely. They're delicious.
Super delicious. Yes. I think huckleberries make the best jam because they are on the tart side. So that's another thing you can email me about. I can swap jam recipes with you. But yeah, huckleberries are the best, and evergreen included.
That's wonderful.
Yeah. There is a watering question in the chat.
Okay.
From DC. Oh, DC wrote, I water my trees with a 5-gallon bucket with 2 small holes on the bottom. During a really hot and dry summer, about how many gallons of water should I water a mature cedar?
You know, it depends on your soil. Everybody, it's hard. I hate to answer watering questions like this because I know it disappoints people, but there's no way for me to tell you exactly how much water to put on something. You have to sort of check for yourself. So for a large tree like that, you know, it probably would be easier to set up a soaker hose around the drip line of the tree and just let it soak in for a day slowly, periodically, because you just need to add some supplemental water to it so that the ground doesn't get completely dry. A 5-gallon bucket probably would take you quite a few to really get enough around a cedar tree to really make a difference. And that's a lot of work for you. Trees are deep rooted. Cedars are more shallow than some, but they go wide too as well. Somebody asked, what do we think of salal? Salal is a great plant for landscaping. It does spread by underground root stem, so you know, think it's going to spread in the landscape. People use it as they think of it as a ground cover, but actually it can grow 8 feet tall. I've been in a salal forest. I'm about 5'1", so it can grow over my head. But it's a beautiful plant, and yeah, it can be used as sort of a swath of landscape, and especially under trees.
I see Erica has, it looks like maybe your question got cut off, but asking about planting trees to replace 2 big ones, and asking about maybe a rain garden and how that might work with it. I will say that we typically do not recommend planting trees within the rain garden, only because they can get very, very large and really disrupt the function of the rain garden itself. But I think one of the reasons it gets so large is because it has really nice composted soils within the rain garden. And maybe I'll kick it back to Laura on this one too. But we of course want really nice established trees. So we should use that method of, planting them into some really nice nutrient dense soil, some nice composted soils. I don't know why I'm making it difficult, but probably a rain garden is not the place to be putting those.
I would agree with that. It's the functionality of the rain garden needs to, the soil needs to remain loose in the bottom of the rain garden, and tree roots will kind of grow in there and mat it up. It also, like Christy said, will grow larger because it's heavily composted soil. So it sometimes will add to the, the tree growing a little crazier big. And also it's going to shade the garden out. So what you've planted there, and somebody else had that question, which I answered in the Q&A on the computer. Things change over time. So, if you put in a tree that's small and it grows big, you're going to shade out the plants you have there that maybe you love, and you don't, maybe you have a bunch of iris or something, that you want to bloom, and it won't happen anymore because you put the tree there. So whenever you put a tree in a garden, you've got to imagine what the future is going to look like. And sometimes your garden changes underneath it. But the rain garden, really function of it is to be more in the open, and not have a bunch of leaves necessarily drop into it. All of that makes a difference.
Mm-hmm. Yes. Can you speak really quickly on your recommendations for adding compost to these native plants? When you do the planting, do you add compost? Do you add compost at any regular interval afterwards?
I add compost depending on whether the soil needs it or not, first of all. So if you have really sandy soil, you have really clay soil, it's great to add compost to it, or you adapt what you plant there to those kinds of soils. Compost is helpful because it will help hold water and help break up clay soil. So in the sandy soils, it helps to hold the water. You want to add it to the whole planting area though. So like I won't dig a hole in the ground and add a bunch of compost to it and plant a plant, because it's essentially like leaving those roots in the root ball to circle around. It will grow in and circle around in that wonderful better soil and won't try to venture out into the native soil that's right next to it. So it's better to amend the whole bed. And sometimes if my soil is decent, I won't add it to the planting hole at all. I'll plant my plant in native soil and I'll put a layer of compost over the top of the whole planting bed. And what happens with that is that gets worked into the soil by the rain and by the microorganisms and worms and other macroorganisms that will pull the compost into the soil. So it's sort of like leaves falling on the ground that decompose and get into the soil. You're using sort of nature's principles to get your soil enriched. And it's easier to do, and it's better for your plants. So that's my method of gardening. Typically, I take advantage of things that will function like that. I actually took an old lawn out of my old house and under a crabapple tree and converted it to just native plants around the base, around the whole area where the lawn was, because it was too shady for a lawn to grow there. And I didn't do anything to the soil. It was very clay. I sheet mulched it. I put cardboard down, wood chips. And then when I planted it, I added compost over the top and then wood chipped over that. And the soil profile changed over the years that I lived there. From adding organic matter to it. And I didn't ever dig it in. There too many tree roots to dig anyway, so I couldn't have if I wanted.
Wonderful. Thank you for sharing that. Well, I'm not seeing any other questions, but if more questions come up, please feel free to reach out to Laura at the Garden Hotline if you are in the King County area, and you can also, if you're in Shoreline, reach out to me with any questions that you might have. Otherwise, I hope that you all are excited to get some native plants in the ground. I think right now is really the sweet time to do it. We're still hopefully quite a few weeks ahead of the first frost, but knock on wood, I think we've really entered fall now. So please get out there and get some new native plants in the ground.
And I love that everybody's putting in ocean spray. Yay.
I know I'm gonna have to take a second look at ocean spray. Yes.
Love it, love it, love it, love it.
Yes. Wonderful. Well, thank you so much, Laura. And thank you so much to everyone who's joined us tonight. Have a wonderful night.
Thank you.